The grand majority of us have no idea the kind of self-talk that we're actually having to ourselves, and we have no idea the impact and the consequences of that self-talk.
And I want you to imagine the person that you look up to the most. What if everything that they have, everything that their life looks like is a byproduct of the self-talk that they have that you haven't yet cultivated?
Hey everybody, it's Bianca.
Welcome back, Evolvers. It's Emilia.
So when Emilia and I were preparing for this episode, the way that we typically do it is we have a spreadsheet always because we live our lives on spreadsheets. And
I love spreadsheets.
I love spreadsheets. I love a good spreadsheet. So we have the episode title, and then we'll do like what the point is we're trying to make and any specific story that we want to, share and like where the story came from. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, I didn't write a story down. Interesting. And the literal thought in my head was, what an idiot. You had one job. In that moment, my self-talk about an episode where we are going to be talking about self-talk was incredibly destructive. And I think that's exactly the point and what I want to dive into today. But the point that I made at the beginning with our cold open is the grand majority of us have no idea how we're talking to ourselves, or that it's even really a problem because we've been talking to ourselves in that way for the majority of our lives. So we don't realize the consequences and the implications of the way we talk to ourselves and why that matters. And really, what are the long-term detriments of talking to yourself in that way? We said we were going to kind of have a little bit of a back and forth dialogue on this. So how do you want to start with that?
Well, Bianca, what I think is fascinating is the fact that I can't tell you how many conversations I've had, and I know you've had many conversations as well, probably in the same vein, of how many people, when they first start to maybe dip their toe into self-awareness, personal development, mental health, therapy, coaching, the whole realm of getting better, one way or another, they will come up against this question of what is your talk? What does your self-talk or your inner dialogue, inner monologue even sound like? And I can't tell you how many people have been like, what are you talking about? What's self-talk? And so what I find is there's many people that dip their toe in and they have no idea that there's this inner voice going on in their head, and they don't know what self-talk is. And they've conveniently dodged all of the things that point and narrow down in the realm of getting better, mental health or self-awareness or well-being towards self-talk. And like, it fascinates me, especially in this day of age where so many of us still don't really connect to or have a good sense of what that self-talk is. And so that's one camp of people. And the other camp of people, individuals that I see, and again, I'm kind of putting this in binary, are the individuals who are aware of their self-talk and, very similar to you, are kind of in that camp of like, I'm aware of my self-talk. I know what it sounds like. Honestly, it's like the only voice in my head, and it's kind of got its full-blown clenches around the wheel of my life. And it's one of the reasons why I'm here sitting in the seat of wanting to get better, because this self-talk is something that is all encompassing my identity, my core beliefs about myself, and I can't get it out of my head, even in the smallest things about I mess up or I make a mistake. And instead of having the center point being compassion, which we'll talk about today, it is more criticism. And that criticism just can't seem to go away, or shame, self-shame can't seem to get out of the self-talk. And so my favorite is when we end up in the area of navigating and really hearing self-talk, and what does that actually sound like versus what does the person on the other end want us to believe it sounds like. And I'll give you a quick example. So there's a client that I've been working for with 3.5 years now. He is someone who is really just getting into, and I say just getting into because he has many, many protectors, and this work has been some of the most deep work he's ever done in his entire life. And he's lived quite a long life. And he just had a protector of his tell me exactly in session earlier this week, exactly how this protector sounds like in his head, which is protecting his manhood. And it was so aggressive. It was so sharp. It was so relentless in the defensiveness of anything that would come close in questioning his manhood, to where I'm not even going to use the language on this podcast because it was that, and I'm not going to say bad, but it was that deconstructive. And so you can be working on yourself, quote unquote, for a long time. However, not letting your inner narrative, your inner self-talk actually be seen and heard by someone else, because there's protective parts of you that kind of get in the way of ever being seen and heard to that level. That's a really vulnerable trek. And so anyone that's joining us today in this podcast episode, if you're in one of those two camps, or you're anywhere in between those two camps where self-talk is this concept that maybe you've heard or seen pop up on your social media platforms, and you want to dip your toe even deeper into understanding what is not just the right way of self-talk, but what is the right way for me. And that extra component for me is really, really critical. And I'm excited, Bianca, for us to get into this dialogue. So the first question that I have for you that I think is incredibly important to this dialogue around self-talk is a shared definition per usual. So as a clinician, as someone who is highly trained and is a high performer in cognitive behavioral therapy and specializes in CBT, which is literally how we cognitively think impacts our behavior. And that is your niche, something that you crush beyond most clinicians, actually all clinicians that I've met. I'm going to give that to you. And yes, I will pump you up just because it is the truth. And I see you behind the scenes refining your skill set so that you can have the level of efficacy on your clients that you do. What, or how would you define from a CBT standpoint, the self-talk or that inner narrative? Like, where would you start?
I appreciate that very much. Thank you. It's been a long journey for sure. Self-talk, ultimately, it's the way that you talk to yourself about yourself and about the world and other people. And most of us, so I actually learned this from you, so I'm going to reference you, but there's 3 different streams of consciousness that we're having at all times. There's the story that you're telling yourself, the story you want the rest of the world to know, and what's actually really true. So there's a primary truth, which is the thoughts that you actually deep down really think and feel. There's the story that you are trying to convince yourself of, so your parts are trying to convince you of. And then there's the story that you try to tell the rest of the world. And we have self-talk all within those, and IFS parts come into play when it comes to all of that, so on and so forth. But the grand majority of us, the types of self-talk that we're having are actually coming from that primary truth, which is so destructive and so hurtful and so mean. Because the stories and the ideas from a CBT lens that we have about ourselves, so the core beliefs that we've developed about ourselves, are coming from the influences that we had in our life up to this point. So I'll give an example. My self-talk for the majority of my life has been some of the most destructive, harmful, shameful, hateful self-talk you'll probably ever hear. It's so bad. Where did that come from? How does someone just develop thinking about themselves in that way? Well, I grew up in an environment where everyone talked to themselves that way and talked to each other in that way. So there was expectations about how we were supposed to be and how we should look and what you're supposed to act like and what you should do and not do and say and not say. And that ends up, you hear it so many times, it starts to become your own voice. Oh, this is what I'm supposed to think. This is what I'm supposed to do. Oh, don't wear that outfit. It looks like this. Oh, you're doing this. Well, it's supposed to be like that. it comes from the influences that we had around us.
Mm-hmm.
And it ends up becoming our own voice, and that ends up becoming our self-talk. So self-talk is the ideas, the narratives, and the stories that you have about yourself, about the world, and about other people that only you can hear because it's in your own mind.
Okay. What we're going to do in this episode is to also help our listeners understand not just a baseline foundation. Thank you for that, because that's really important and critical for what we're going to build upon. You mentioned helpful. We talked about like constructive, deconstructive. When we talk about self-talk, right? That is the quote unquote imagery, the visualization, essentially the narrative, the string of stories that are being woven about you, which is that primary truth, right? Like just about like you as you are, right? That's the first ring that you're referring to, the first stream of consciousness. Then the second ring out from that, if you can imagine, dear listener, three rings kind of in a target formation. The first ring is that primary truth. This is just like in general, like this is what is. It just is. This is the truth. If you were to have two people seeing one vantage point of your narrative, this is the truth. You are a good person, right? Like then the second ring is what your consciousness believes your self-image is to the world. This is what the stories that your ego tries to protect you and encourage you to have this quote unquote narrative about yourself, your identities to the world. And that's a story that you're trying to convince yourself of, trying to convince other people of. And so that self-talk is rooted in that. And then the third one, right, that is like the world at large. So the narrative really can run from anything from deconstructive to neutral to constructive. And we can think about those rings more on a spectrum. And in the realm of self-talk, right, this is like how you talk to yourself about yourself per se, not necessarily self-talk about others, self-talk about your specific skill sets, identity, etc. What the general sense in the literature right now is more binary. So you have positive self-talk and negative self-talk. And where Bianca and I at Evolve are coming from is not trying to put things in a binary category. That might be helpful for some individuals to hear this and think about, okay, was my self-talk positive today, right? Think happy thoughts, right? That's not all you got to do. Or was it negative? We want to encourage and invite all of our listeners to kind of think about it on a spectrum of helpful and unhelpful. And it's not an either or. It's to what degree is this self-talk helpful to what, right? My goals, what I'm trying to achieve, the circumstance, where I'm at. So for example, Bianca, what you said at the very beginning with you had one job, right? To what degree was that helpful for you in the moment of doing what you needed to do, which was just, okay, I don't know, put an example down. Think of an example, think of a story that you could share for this episode that could help make it relatable to listeners. And there was a split second, a microbial moment where you can put that energy into actually recognizing what were some examples that you could bring in that would be helpful for the listeners. Or you could literally focus that self-talk on deconstructing yourself. You suck, you had one job, like what a freaking idiot. Like that energy is more on the deconstructive or unhelpful side. So for our listeners, I think now that we have the foundation, let's build upon that foundation with a spectrum to where listeners can ask themselves, okay, at any given time throughout their days, they listen to this. And then they start to kind of attune to that self-talk. Now that they're aware that it exists, they're aware, it has a specific functionality of helping make sense of our world, helping to uphold the beliefs that we have about ourselves, about other people, and about the world at large. Now let's see what can the tool that we can use every single day to categorize where our self-talk is. So in case we wanted to get a pulse check, we can understand how 0 to 10, how helpful, if 10 out of 10 is helpful, self-talk, 0 is unhelpful or deconstructive, 0 to 10, where is my self-talk right now?
Right. And the point is not to just always be, you don't always have to be positive and like gentle and kind with yourself. That's not That's not what good self-talk is. Is it appropriate for the situation at the current time? And sometimes you do need to be harder on yourself. Sometimes it is really adaptive to be like, come on, I know you can do better than this. Get it together. Sometimes that can be really helpful. Other times, you could say the same exact thing, but it's not helpful given the circumstance or given how you're feeling at the moment or given your emotional state or given some of the other things that are going on in your life. Helpful and unhelpful, destructive and constructive, good, bad, whatever. It really is dependent on the situation. But I do also believe the other thing that it's highly dependent on is, are you criticizing a situation based on your worth in its entirety or based on a behavior or an action that you just did? The reason self-talk is so destructive for so many people is because you're not just judging a behavior that you did. You are judging yourself as a whole. So in that example of me missing that story or example, it could have become extremely destructive, where it would have been, what is wrong with you? You're so incompetent. Why are you so incapable? What, like, Emilia should just drop you, blah, 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 blah. And it could have gotten, real bad. It could have gotten to even worse than that. And because it has in the past. And I know that my thoughts have the capacity to go down that rabbit hole. That is me and my parts and my self-talk attacking the self as a whole, meaning shame-bound narratives of I am bad, I am inherently defective, and there's something wrong with me. That is almost never constructive. Now, we have talked on this show previously. Shame isn't necessarily 100% bad. There are adaptive times when shame is appropriate. When you've done something that goes against your own morality, right? That's sometimes appropriate. But again, how are you communicating to yourself in those moments? How are you presenting it? And then what's the aftermath of that? What's the impact of that self-talk? And what are you able to do or not do because of the way that you're communicating to yourself?
So I want to pull out a lot of things that you just mentioned in that. And I want us to now apply. So we have the definition, we have the spectrum of helpful to unhelpful. We have a 0 to 10 scale if you want to use that I found to be with clients so freaking helpful. Now, I want to bring in some math. Most of us, I'll just say, given the community that I've heard, get immediately triggered when I bring in math. But here's the thing. I'm going to call it evolve math, growth math, something that actually helps to lift us up a little bit. And I'm not going to ask you to do anything. I'm not going to ask anyone listening to do math. I'm just going to give us some of these numbers that are really important for us to understand why self-talk matters and how there is a more helpful way to be doing quote unquote self-talk or to be speaking towards yourself than there is a bad or unhelpful way for you. So when we think about this, right, which is imperative, self-reflection, self-awareness, mindfulness, attunement to our brain and how our brain works is really, really critical, because the growth math that is here is that, when we think about how many thoughts per day we have, and we've mentioned this in past episodes on IG Lives, on different Out of the Mud events, we can have as many as, I want to say, it depends on obviously the level of hyperactivity within your own brain. But a lot of people don't know this. And I find this to be extremely helpful to bring in the neuroscience component of this when it comes to our self-talk. We can have between 60,000, I want to say, the latest research is showing 60 to 90,000 thoughts per day, right? So yeah. And of those thoughts, right? So picture a pie. A pie is representing all of your thoughts. So if you were to dump out your brain, picture like Harry Potter style, when not Voldemort, Dumbledore. I think it's Dumbledore puts his thoughts into the
he pulls out a memory and puts it into the cauldron.
Oh, love it. Okay, so imagine, thank you, Bianca, pulling out not just the memories, but all the thoughts that you have per day. And we pull that out into the cauldron, and that cauldron now becomes a pie, and the pie is in front of you. Okay. So that pie has between 60,000 and 90,000 different thoughts that you've had your entire day, right? That's just one day. Now, 80% of that pie of thoughts, 80% of those are likely negative. So color those thoughts to be unhelpful, right? And now 80% of that pie is red. The other 20% of that pie, which represents your thoughts, is blue. So blue, maybe thinking of those helpful thoughts. So if you picture that's your one day, and then you have how many days per year? You have 365 days per year. So now imagine, it's probably hard to imagine 365 pies. If you do an aerial view, as if like there's a drone looking down on your 365 pies, what color are you going to see more of? You're going to see the red, which the red represents negative thoughts, unhelpful thoughts, deconstructive thoughts. We want to really turn that into the aerial view, looking at 365 pies of that are blue, representing blue thoughts, helpful thoughts, constructive thoughts. Now, why is that important to kind of visualize and think about? Because when we recognize this one stat that 95% of our thoughts can be repetitive, up to probably even more, and that's a given range. Oh, we're having the same thought again and again and again. So what does it mean if we know that negative thoughts or unhelpful, deconstructive self-talk that happens again and again in our day-to-day, that leads to an inhibition of our own performance, a deconstructive narrative of who we are. And it even shows that negative thoughts lead to lower levels of positive self-regard, lower levels of self-esteem, higher levels of stress, and higher levels of emotional distress, meaning the inability to be able to navigate the stresses that come. And we look at all the components that are attached to that, right? We're not having good moods. We're not able to connect with people. We then start to isolate, feel disconnected from the world. Then we start to really pick up on a ton of bad habits. We then start to, holy shit, the math that's in front of us. If we have the ability to change one of those 60 to 90,000 thoughts that we have, one thought can change multiple thoughts that repeat themselves throughout the day. Eventually that pie is going to look a lot better and is going to have more of those helpful, constructive thoughts that are there. And what that does is that contributes to more helpful, adaptive, and constructive behaviors for ourselves, higher levels of positive regard, higher levels of more hope and positivity in the world at large as you look and engage with the people that you love and care about, higher elevated modes, higher and better habits, higher levels of performance, higher levels of the ability to cope with the distress that comes throughout your day. So when we look at that, it's like, oh, there's so much available to us when we can change our thoughts and we have the ability to navigate our own self-talk. We have the ability to change our state. Our state can change our entire life. And so that's the math that's in front of us. That's the math that is available to us.
From a CBT lens, to your point, this is exactly how CBT frames our entire being of living. How you think impacts how you feel, and therefore what you do. And then what you do impacts how you think, which impacts how you feel, which impacts what you do. And it's this never-ending cycle. And they all impact each other. So your behavior impacts your emotion impacts your thoughts impact your emotions. It's never ending. It's a spiral. The grand majority of my life has been spent in negative thinking. Which is why I struggled with my identity for the majority of my life, because I was consistently having negative thoughts, negative emotions, and then unhelpful behaviors. So it caused me to become the kind of person that I did not like, that I did not want to be. And so because of the person that I wanted to be, and because of the types of thoughts that I wanted to have, and the kinds of emotional states that I wanted to consistently live in, the kinds of thoughts that I was having were very destructive. They were not helpful in getting me to become the kind of woman that I wanted to be.
Right.
So, what is the right way to have self-talk? What is the right self-talk? The way that you communicate to yourself should help you move into the direction of the things that you want. Now, for many of us, and me included, I have a manager part. So we've done episodes on IFS. If you haven't listened to that episode yet, go listen to it. Emilia does a really beautiful job of breaking down what internal family systems is. But ultimately, there's 4 different kinds of protectors, parts that we have. So there's the exile, which is like our deepest core wounds. There's managers that basically try to run and manage our life. There's firefighters that are more the reactionary type. They are in response to situations that happen. And then there is true self. True self is the most grounded, centered, holistic part of you. It is the truest part of ourselves that all of us deeply crave and want to be, but very few people actually ever get there. I have a manager part. I have named it Mom. This manager part, oh, it is so powerful. And in therapy, I've been unpacking this and working through this. This manager does such a good job of trying to convince me that I need to berate myself in order to get into the direction that I want to be in. So to this part, it's like, no, what do you mean? It's super adaptive. It's going to get you exactly where you want to go. I have to basically Miyagi myself and help this part realize, that really actually isn't helpful. I know you think that that's helpful because we've had to do this our entire lives, but I'm not in that situation anymore. I'm not in the place in my life anymore where I need to be careful of X, Y, and Z because this person, and this person might actually hurt me. Right. Where that actually was probably appropriate because I would have gotten attacked for that. So I'm literally having self-talk to my self-talk. Again, this is why getting a therapist is so helpful because somebody will actually help you be able to do this. Like, I didn't learn this on my own. I learned this because of Emilia and so many of the other amazing resources that I've had. But your self-talk needs to help you move into the direction of true self, of the things that you want, of the people you want to be around, of the person that you deeply want to be. And for the majority of us, I guarantee if we sat down and had a conversation with you and heard some of the way that your parts were speaking and the way that you were speaking to yourself, it would be insanely destructive. It would not be moving you into the direction of where you want to go. It's probably why you're having a really hard time actually being the kind of person that you want to be and going into the direction of where you want to go.
Facts. So kind of in closing, what I want to give our listeners, a new way or the modern way of thinking, as opposed to just leaving our software in the old, not updated realm. So I'm not going to go super deep into this, but there is what's called a theory of constructed emotions. And the theory of constructive emotions essentially breaks down the fact that, not just a theory, but more of now a fact, given the research that we do have, hence why CBT is the most cutting edge research-based, clinical back and tested methodology for high levels of efficacy in treatment, CBT and IFS in particular, that your thoughts, there are precognition, meaning thoughts that happen before you are consciously aware of them, that construct the emotion that you experience, and that emotion essentially catalyzes a behavioral response. So the stimulus isn't the emotion that prompts the response. There's a stimulus, which is the thought, unconscious more often than not, that catalyzes the emotion or constructs the emotion. So for example, if you're experiencing sadness and you feel sad, what's happening before that feeling of sadness is an unconscious thought, which is where self-talk comes in, that is charging up that emotion of sadness. That thought might be, I am grieving my cat, or I miss my cat. I feel loss because my cat is no longer here. Could be something along that lines. Usually it's not that robotic.
So it's a thought, it's a concept, it's images, it's words, or it's pictures. So if you just lost your cat and you see a cat, that might produce sadness because you then conjure the image of your own cat, and that triggers a sad emotion because you are experiencing grief.
Right. And paired with that is a physiological response that your body neurochemically starts to go into. And so there's like actual body-based arousal that's going on. And all of this is usually happening below our conscious awareness, right? That's why mindfulness is so powerful, because mindfulness essentially says, hey, let's actually figure out what our body is doing before our perception tries to interpret that, and see if we can change the controller. So if we really backtrack and recognize that self-talk, there is a right way to do it for us. The wrong way, we can recognize that it's aggressive, not helpful, deconstructive, shame-based, never give yourself a break. That's not helpful because it's just adding to the stress. What can we do as a quick tip in this episode that can help you attune towards that? This is really where those 3 C's of CBT come into hand. And Bianca, this is something that is now so unconscious to us, but when you're really attuning to your self-talk, it really looks like that catch, check, and figure out what the heck do we need to change. So you have to catch, what is that thought that is charging up? What is that thought, that imagery, that experience that is happening on a cognition level of the cat that is happening before you're even like aware it's happening? The check component really checks in on how accurate or how truthful is that thought for the situation, and is it useful? So more often than not, right, because of that growth math that I did earlier, our thoughts, this is why people say, like, don't believe every single thing that you think or that you feel, because, and that's a really gross, like, over generalization, but like not every single thought that we have is true. And I'll use a sentiment from a client. It's like, I didn't realize every thought that I had wasn't the truth. It's like, no, a lot of thoughts that we have are not the truth. But yeah, because we're not checking the accuracy, the relativity, the usefulness of our thoughts, we're not able to really change them. And that's where the change happens. So catch, check, and then change. And changing, this is where the help of a therapist, a coach, really starts to come in. One change that's been incredibly big for me is talking to myself using my own first name. So there was something that I said and I sent in the chat of group coaching recently, and it kind of exposed a little bit of my self-talk. And what I had put is the you or I, or actually using my name in my self-talk, preparing for anything that I do. And what that does is to really relate to ourselves in a way that we would a friend. So this helps to calm and deactivate maybe those shame-based response systems that lead to deconstructive thoughts. So for example, Emilia, you've got this. That's literally using you have got this, right? The you. Using your own name, I put Emilia, right? And then encouragement, not just like, you can do anything you want to set your mind to, something that's actually believable to me, right? That's really, really important. And so if you can tip the scales of, let's say, even put in a ratio, I'm kind of pulling in Gottman's research, a 5-to-1 ratio essentially says you have 5 positive experiences to 1 negative experience in intimate relationships. Let's think about it from, even bring it down, 3 positive thoughts or helpful, constructive thoughts to 1 negative thought. That can help tip the scales or make that quote unquote pie that we talked about of your self-talk on the day-to-day that much better, and therefore that much more helpful for you. So it's a sneaky tool to be able to challenge your own thinking, and to then be able to change it is where so much of that work that Bianca, myself, and us at Evolve, we do. And that's where the real change therein lies. But to dip your toe in is a great start, and to even attune to what it sounds like is great, because then you can kind of bring your notes into whenever you feel ready to dip your toe into therapy or coaching or whatnot.
Another really powerful tool that we have our clients do is getting into the habit of journaling. and just freestyle journaling whatever comes up. We think in patterns. That's why we have the same 95% of thoughts over and over again. And not only that, we think in the same thinking styles. It's called a cognitive distortion. One of mine is all or nothing thinking. I am the queen of black and white thinking. It's insane. I'm like, I'm either the best thing that ever happened in the world or I'm crap. And I'll use kinder words. It's
as well
so,
as personalizing everything is something that you shared is you're the queen of.
You know, I'm really, it's why I can speak so well on this, because I am the queen of it.
She's been there.
I have been there. We think in patterns, we feel in patterns, we act in patterns. So when you can get into the habit of journaling these things out, you can start seeing those patterns. You're like, oh my God, every time I see my sister, or every time I see my cousin, or every time I interact with this person at work, I feel X emotion. That's a pattern. That's wonderful. Now we can do something about it. Now, when you know that you're going to go see that person, you can catch it, check it, and then change it.
Yeah.
To use those 3 C's. So using Emilia's technique, using the one that I had said, be mindful of your thoughts. This is where mindfulness really comes into play. Most of us are unconsciously walking through life as robots, and that's why we can't get the outcomes that we desperately want, because we are not conscious of the way we are thinking, feeling, and therefore what we are doing. And if you follow these simple tools and you follow them throughout the rest of your life, it'll help you go faster and more clearly into the direction that you want to head in.
Facts. I think that where we end there, I think, is just so powerful. And it reminds us all of how much power and how much in control we can be if we so choose, right? Because there are the ability to bring that, what's called the locus of control, inwardly, where you can attune to your thoughts. You can be mindful of what your thoughts are saying. And over time, with practice, you can assert a degree of guidance and control, if you want to use that word, over, with, and through your thoughts. And I think that that's extraordinarily powerful. He or she or they who has more awareness, attunement, and guidance in their thoughts, which is what's called self-mastery, right? Big, true self-guidance, is he or she or they who is in control of the inputs and the efforts within their life, which then increases their probability to have what they want in their life, how life wants to unfold. They have control over that. So with that being said, if this is of interest to you and you've resonated with this topic, my episode suggestion would be 436, how to heal when you don't have support. It ain't easy to do it by yourself. You don't have to do it by yourself. We are here to support you. And if you're finding yourself in the situation, this is a great next step for you, aside from Bianca's suggestion, because healing doesn't happen just in a vacuum, but you can do certain things by yourself in the interim.
Mine is 429, how to not feel like a mess about yourself. All right, everybody. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Go have some wonderful adaptive self-talk. And we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.